All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're taking a look at the work of one of the most important contemporary philosophers you've probably never heard of, Taha Abdel Rahman. He's a Moroccan thinker, and he has this really powerful message about how cultures can find their own way, their own authentic path, in a world that's constantly pushing them to be something else.
Abderrahmane kicks things off with a pretty stark diagnosis. He looks at the modern Arab-Islamic world and says, essentially, that it's suffering from a crisis of thought. It's lost its way, caught in a kind of great intellectual wandering. It's a bold and, honestly, a pretty provocative place to start.
So what does this crisis actually look like? Well, he frames it as being trapped between two mirrors. Imagine looking into one mirror and all you see is a frozen image of the past, then you turn to the other mirror and all you see is a cheap copy of someone else. Neither one is really you, right? That's the trap.
And he breaks this down brilliantly. He says this wandering is really a trap of imitation. On one side, you have this fearful clinging to tradition, just repeating the past without really thinking about it because you're scared of losing your identity. On the other side, you've got this blind copying of the West, hoping for some kind of external validation. For Abderrahmane, both of these are just dead ends. They're two different kinds of surrender, not genuine thought.
Okay, so if imitation is the disease, what's the cure? This is where Abderrahmane gets really interesting. He argues that you have to start by questioning the very tools you use to think. He takes on this massive unspoken assumption that there's only one universal way to be rational. Is that really true?
First, he identifies the model of reason that's dominant today. He calls it demonstrative rationality. You can think of this as the logic of a science lab or a computer program. It's all about abstract, universal rules and formal logic. It's detached, it's objective, and its whole goal is to prove things with almost mathematical certainty.
But, he points out, there's another incredibly powerful form of reason out there, one that he finds deeply rooted in the Islamic tradition. He calls it dialogical rationality. Now, this isn't about abstract proofs at all. It's about human beings talking to each other, persuasion, debate, and the search for truth through conversation and interaction.
And this comparison just makes it crystal clear, doesn't it? Demonstrative reason is like a monologue. It's logic talking to itself. But dialogical reason, well, that's a conversation. It needs another person. One is a tool you use for calculation, the other is a tool for communication, for building a shared understanding. And here's the key takeaway. The form of reason you choose to prioritize will completely change your entire intellectual world.
Now, this idea about different types of reason leads him straight into his next big target, the concept of modernity. For so many people, being modern just means becoming more like the West. But Abderrahmane says no, that is a huge and, frankly, a disempowering mistake.
He makes this incredibly useful distinction. On one side, you have what he calls the reality of modernity. That's the specific historical version that happened to pop up in the West. He sees this as a cultural product, something that other cultures are just told to import, like a piece of technology. But then on the other side, you have the spirit of modernity. These are the universal values that made modernity possible in the first place. And that spirit, he argues, doesn't belong to any one culture. It's up for grabs.
So what is this universal spirit? He boils it down to three key principles. First, there's autonomy. Having the courage to actually think for yourself, to be your own guide. Second, there's critique, the willingness to question everything, and I mean everything, including your own most cherished traditions and any ideas you're importing from outside. And third, comprehensiveness, the drive to apply these principles to every single part of life and society.
And here is the revolutionary conclusion. If any culture can activate the spirit of autonomy, critique, and comprehensiveness from within its own traditions and context, it can create its own unique modernity. All of a sudden, the idea of an Islamic modernity or an African modernity isn't a contradiction in terms. It becomes a creative possibility, even an imperative.
This brings us right to the heart of his entire project. So we've talked about getting the right tools for the job, things like dialogue and the spirit of modernity. But what's the foundation? What do we build all of this on?
Just think about that for a second. It's one of the biggest questions there is. And for centuries, at least in the West, philosophy has had a pretty consistent answer. The classic answer, going all the way back to Aristotle, is that reason defines us. Man is a rational animal. But Abderrahmane completely flips the script. He says what is most fundamental to being human isn't our ability to reason, it's our capacity for ethics. We are, first and foremost, ethical beings.
Our ability to take moral action is what truly makes us who we are.
And his logic here is really compelling. Think about it. Reason is just a tool. It can be used to build a hospital or to build a bomb. What guides it? Ethics. For him, every single action, including the act of thinking itself, is an ethical one. And that's why any philosophy that isn't grounded in moral practice and action is, in his view, ultimately empty and incomplete.
Okay, so let's tie all of this together. We've got our new tools, we've got our new foundation in ethics. How does this actually change the way we think and create in the real world? How do we make that jump from being passive imitators to being active innovators?
Abderrahmane gives us this absolutely brilliant, concrete example to show us how, and it involves what might be the single most famous phrase in all of modern philosophy.
I think, therefore I am. You know it, I know it. This phrase has been translated directly into Arabic and pretty much every other language for centuries. It's the perfect example of simply importing an idea whole and untouched.
But Abderrahmane forces us to look closer. He asks a devastating question. Is this really a translation? Or is it a form of intellectual surrender? Is it an act of genuine understanding? Or is it just copying the words?
And here is his masterstroke. He says a more authentic, a more creative translation, one that actually activates the spirit of philosophy from within an Islamic ethical framework, isn't a passive statement at all. It's an active command. Look and you will find. I mean, just look at the difference. The Imitation is about an isolated, abstract self that just is. His creative translation is about an engaged, searching self that has to do something, that has to act, in order to find truth.
And this isn't just a clever word game. This one example perfectly summarizes his entire philosophy in action. It's about moving from passively receiving a conclusion to actively engaging in a process. It's the literal shift from imitation to innovation.
And that leaves us with a huge and, I think, crucial question for our own time. Taha Abdel Rahman offers a roadmap for one particular tradition, but the challenge he raises is universal. In a world with so much overwhelming influence coming at us from all sides, how do any of us, as individuals or as whole cultures, truly learn to think for ourselves?